Hello and welcome to a very special How I Base Things. Now, one of the most common questions that comes up in the comments on any of my videos is, how did you do the base? And I have done basing videos twice before. Thing is, it's been about 5 and 7 years since those last ones, so modern standards require modern solutions. What I'm going to show you today is all relatively simple stuff and based on the same principle of sand, PVA, and a bit of paint. The recipes I'm going to show you are just what I like using, and with this you'll be able to take any of what I pop in the description at the bottom of the videos and apply them to your own miniatures. So, let's get cracking. No further mucking around. How do we base things?
Now, when it comes to basing, you're really putting the finishing touches on a miniature. In some videos, you'll quite often hear me talking about adding context to what we've done. So sometimes, for a predominantly black or white miniature, your base is an opportunity to add a bit of color to the color scheme without needing to whip out another paint and make the miniature itself look busy. And sometimes it's simply taking a fella and putting him in some dusty sand. It's really a matter of finishing off the miniature in a way that makes sense. So adding context can sometimes mean putting down sand and grass and dirt, and this fella, of course, he's going to look like he's in a western. And it can sometimes be adding something that is lacking from the miniature. But for now, let's concentrate on the simple stuff. I've got here a cowboy. This dude I painted in about half an hour, threw some contrast and speed paints on him, and now we need a base. And I've got here my weapons of choice. Now, this old Citadel sand, man, I love this stuff, and they don't actually seem to make it anymore. It's funny. We buy sand. Whether you're getting it from, when I picked it up from Games Workshop, or you're going through a hobby supplier or what have you, buying sand, it sounds insane on the face of it, but what you're getting is a specific grain, a specific kind of consistency. There's a reason for picking a brand that you like and trying to stick with it. Now, I am dangerously close to running out of this stuff, so looking for something that'll match that so I can carry on painting my armies in that particular style. But there's also this stuff here. This is Army Course from Warworld Scenics. They do quite a neat range of basing stuff, and there's a ton of other basing materials out there online. I'm just showing you what I like to use. A little bit of research. And people say all the time, oh, Google's not very good now. Trust me, if you are looking for something to buy, Google will help you. So, let's concentrate on the basics here, though. I've got my PVA glue. If you are in the States or somewhere like that, I know Elmer's wood glue is similar. This is just a little container which I've added a tiny wee bit of water to, because you can use it neat, but it'll stretch a little bit further, and I find it easier to apply when it's just a wee bit runny. So, I dot some of that out onto my palette. It doesn't need to be on a palette, I just happen to have that sitting right in front of me. We take our happy little cowboy and paint PVA onto his base. Now, if you thin this down quite a lot, you will tend to find that, especially on plastic bases, it'll kind of spread because you are putting a water-based material over plastic, and it just won't work. So if you're finding that this stuff goes a little streaky and awful, maybe you've just watered it down too much. All the same, a thin coat of this over the whole base. Then we take our container of Gumpf and just dip them into it. Give it a little wiggle. Now, I like to leave my guys sitting there for 20-30 seconds just for it to start drying and sticking to the base. You can tip them upside down and knock it all off straight away, but for some base material mixes, you'll find that will knock off some of these bigger chunks a little bit quickly. So just going to give them a wee gentle tap, and there we go. Now that is one of the easiest bases you'll ever do. You can leave it like this, just sand, like particularly this coarse stuff which has the bigger chunks for interest in there. You can do it like that, but we're going to paint. We're going to add a little bit more to this once that PVA has dried. And once that's dried, we can start adding a bit of life to it with some more color. Now what I've got is a little bit of brown sand, and I'm going to mix this down about half and half, maybe a little bit more water. It doesn't matter too much if you paint slightly more thin than it should be. You want it to be almost like a wash here. So once that's thinned down, I can just bop it over the top, and you'll see it sort of slurps up nice and quickly. Now this also acts as kind of a sealant stage. If you want it to be a little bit thicker, it's not a big problem. It's actually quite useful in some instances. But I'm just going to go around lightly touching the tops of the stones and what have you. And the capillary action of our thinned paint will take care of most of the rest. And once that has dried, I've got one of my scraggly old brushes and some dark sand. And I'm just going to lightly, across the top of that, dry brush the stones. Now, don't worry too much if you do end up hitting like the sides of his boots or what have you. It isn't going to matter one jot. What cowboy doesn't have dusty boots? What space marine isn't walking across a real planet? You know, if you do get a little bit of your basing material onto your miniature, hey ho. I'm not entering Golden Demon with this chap. Now what I've got is some slightly thinner PVA, just a little bit of extra water in there until it's kind of loose, and a slightly smaller brush. What I'm going to do is pop little dots of this close to some of the bigger rocks where you're going to see, it's shielded from the sun, let's say. So if there's any grass out in the desert, it's likely to be in spots like this. Once I've got my PVA on, I'm going to gather up a little bit of this flock, static grass, and just sprinkle it on top. Now some will say, oh, you have to use a static grass applicator, to get it to stand up. No, you don't. Watch this. There you go. Now anything that's still stuck there is going to stand up pretty naturally as it dries. There's not very much on there at all, but the same principle is true. Just tip it upside down, knock it off. You don't have to shoot static grass halfway across the room to get a finished base. And then with a bit of desert yellow from Vallejo, I'm going to paint the rim on the base. Now some folks like to do these in black, regardless of what it is they've got on the base itself, and while it can work, I think you're missing an opportunity to add a little bit more visual oomph and to tie everything together. Matter of personal taste, but as is most things with painting. Now, if you followed that, you now know how to do every base I've ever shown you on the channel. For the last 5 years or so, when I say the base recipes in the description, scroll on down to the bottom there and it will tell you what I've used to do that. It is just sand, paint, and a little bit of gumph, one or two little finishing touches. That's it. So what I'm going to do is motor through a couple of other options, just to show you some of my other favorites. So let's get onto that real quick. Now this is the Citadel sand. This is just PVA and sand over the bare base, and I'm going to use here, this is a brown paint from Müller, which is essentially a department store here in Germany. It's nothing fancy. I tend to find, folks get kind of funny about using their acrylic paints, their miniature paints on their bases. Since you're watering them down or just dry brushing most of the time, you aren't using a huge amount of them, but it is nice to have a cheaper option as well. So I'm going to pop this down and grab a little bit of this out onto my palette. Now I've thinned that down about half and half with water, and let's go ahead and just blorp this over the base. Now I'm applying this a little bit thicker because I want this to be a sealing stage, same as I mentioned earlier on. And honestly, it doesn't matter if I use too much of it because it's cheap as chips. So this is what I tend to use for my air quotes generic World War II basing. So if I'm doing Northwest Europe or somewhere like that, bit of brown, bit of grass does the job just fine. Once that's dried thoroughly, we go back to dark sand. That's going to make a recurring appearance in most of my base recipes. This is quite a jump, and if you do want, you can go back over first of all with a little bit of brown sand just to give it a sort of interstitial step, but you don't really need to. Most of what we're going to do here is going to be covered in static grass in a second. So really we just want a bit of texture, and that'll be perfect. Now for your static grass on these ones, what I tend to do is try and cover most of the base fairly randomly. You do want little patches of bare earth showing through. It'll add a bit of interest to the base, and that should be plenty. So I'm going to go ahead, stick my brush in between my teeth, give it a wee sprinkle, pat it a couple of times just to make sure that that has stuck in place, And then, there we go, that sucker's standing up. Doesn't look like much now because the grass is still wet underneath, but now I've gone and painted the base room with the same brown that I used for the base itself. Now I'm going to need to give that a second coat because it's a bit thin. What I have is one of the mountain tufts, or is this a highland tuft? I forget. From the army painter, you just pick what you like here. And a tiny wee dab of super glue on the bottom because I want it to stick permanently. A lot of these tufts will say that they are self-adhesive, and that's usually true, but I like permanent. So once it's stuck down, just adjust the, I want to say bristles. Yeah, bristles. Adjust those a bit with a bit of a poke around with your brush there. Now that'll work for pretty much anything. It is a nice, again, air quotes, generic brown base. That's your European theatre of operations, that's your Eastern Front. Add a couple more and larger tufts. You've got something that'll even work for your Pacific Island hopping stuff. You know, once they get in land, there's a little bit of grass. That works just fine. But what about a more urban finish? So I've got my army course, that rockier sand here. And what I've watered down, this is basalt grey from Vallejo. It's quite similar to Mechanica Standard Grey, or what is it, dark grey from the Army Painter. And yep, just go ahead, bop this on, paint my rocks. And once that has dried thoroughly, and it's important that this is bone dry all the way through, I've got some Agrax Earthshade. And I'm going to go ahead and blop this over most of the base. But any patches that I leave behind or that I miss, I'm not too worried about. This, you'll see, is just part one of our exciting shading adventure. Now again, let that dry thoroughly, and what I have is a Thonian Camo Shade next. Now this is the old stuff in the bigger bottles, but it's not going to matter one jot which one you use, really. Over some of the bits that we've missed, and you can quite happily blorp this onto parts that we haven't missed. This is giving a little bit more life to that sort of mucked about urban finish, because nothing's really truly just flat grey. And that's relatively subtle once it dries, but it is quite nice in person. Certainly doesn't show up as much as it should do on camera. Now I'm going back to basalt grey, and what I'm going to do is lightly overbrush. So I want to bring back the grey and leave just a little bit of that grimy stuff in the recesses so that it looks more like moss and dirt and what have you collecting over time. And then to finish off the stones, I have, funnily enough, stone grey from Vallejo. Now, this is quite a lot lighter, so go easy with it at first. This is going to add just a bit more depth and has a really nice colour to it. Also, a very light grey-green will work quite well here. Once we've popped on a little bit of this, concentrating more on the stones and the bigger parts of rubble. And then, same as before, what I'm going to do is just tiny wee bits of PVA. And the static grass one I'm going to apply, this is simply called patchy grass. This one's from Warlord Games. But any sort of dead grass or grimy grass, there's all sorts of names for what different companies call their static grass mixes. I'm going to add just a little bit of life to this, funnily enough, patchy dead nonsense. Now, grass that's been in a container for a while can get quite clumpy, so just pluck it up, give it a little wiggle between your fingers, kind of like sifting it, and then over our base. Couple of taps from underneath. Let's flick it upside down. So there is another one down. This one I'm going to paint the base rim in black in a second. This is great for things like Zona Alpha or 40k games where you want a sort of urban-ish finish, which will still fit in with some of the more wild tables that you'll see. Pretty cool, I think. Now, I wasn't going to do another one, but one more here. What this one is the Battlefield Brown basing material from the Army Painter, which isn't actually sand for the most part. I'm pretty sure there's some cork sort of texture in here. I'm going to run some Oak Brown over the top, and same as always, this is thinned down, as you'll see, quite a bit. Now this is how I based my Death Guard army that I recently did. Now I like this color scheme for a slightly weird, slightly irradiated kind of finish. It's a good Wasteland kind of brownish finish. So on goes, first of all, the Oak Brown. Now I'm going to go ahead and give this a pretty heavy overbrush. This is burning ore. Now you might notice throughout I haven't really been giving any alternatives for most of the colors I'm using, and it's because it doesn't matter. You don't need to be told how to find an orange paint. Just eyeball it. It's dirt. It doesn't matter. Now, I really do want to give this a proper scrub, so as I start leaving less from my brush, I'm going to push down a little bit more firmly with my bristles and make sure that it is pretty orange there. And now I'm going to very lightly go back and forth with a little bit of Dorado skin. This being just a little bit peachy introduces a different kind of warmth to the top of the base. And I find, like I said, looking for an irradiated, grimy wasteland kind of finish, this suits me down to the ground. So that's pretty much done. And then with a couple of tufts and some oak brown on the rim, there is our Wasteland styled base. Like I said, I use this for my Death Guard, but it's also really handy for, again, maybe Zona Alpha type stuff. 5 clicks through the zone I also like this with. It just, yeah, it's grimy and kind of weird and suits that look, I think. So yeah, let's get them all together. That's my bases done. Let's have a look at the wee patch of dirt I've painted today.
And so, altogether, there are the bases we've done today. You've now got everything you need to take the recipes that I pop in the descriptions at the bottom of these videos and apply them to any of the miniatures that you see. Substitutions, changes in colors, the question, can I use this different color? Yes, you can. Easy as that. It will just look a little bit different. But to be quite honest, that's not going to matter. You're painting dirt. Don't get too hung up on that. So, as always, thanks goes out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, and maybe, if I'm lucky, some of that Citadel sand when I need it most. My wonderful producers are showing up on screen now as well, folks, and thank you very much for your support. I mean it every time, even when I'm painting dirt. So any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram, they're both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.